In this video, I'm going to walk through the process of editing an article. We've got quite a good article here. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done, and so that's actually quite a good example to walk through in terms of some of the finer skills of editing. In terms of editing more generally, I would say there are roughly kind of 5 different things that you would need to do as part of the editing process. The first is looking at the structure of the article and whether elements are in the right place. There's the most obvious aspect of editing, which is the spelling, but also the style. So does it follow the style of the publication? We'll come on to some of those things as we go. Cutting back and simplifying, that's the main thing we're going to do with this article. And then we've got fact checking. What facts are in there? Are they attributed properly? Is there any missing information in the article as well? And I've put those towards the end because if you're going to cut things out, then there's no point fact checking until you know what you actually need to fact check. If you're going to chop facts out, then there's no point checking those facts. Now we start with structure. Structure's the most obvious thing to start with, and this is simple questions like, does it follow the structure of the style of article that it is? If it's a news piece, which this is, does it tell us the story in the first sentence? So here's the first sentence. Can you read that sentence alone and know what the story is? Or do you need to read further? Well, yes, this first sentence tells us exactly what the story is. The average price has decreased. The headline needs to do the same. So what we're looking at is, in a news story, does the headline and the first line, do those both basically say the same thing? That's what they normally should do. They repeat the same information. We write the article as if the headline doesn't exist. So the headline says the same as well. So in terms of structure, that's good. We move on from that top piece of information to a bit of extra background information about it. Who said it? What are the specific numbers involved? And so in terms of structure, this is fine. It's got the right structure. We get kind of less important information as we go on. We've got a nice chart, and we've got an ending which kind of looks ahead. So it tells the reader what they can do next. So structure, we can go without now. We've checked the structure. What about spelling and style? In fact, I'm going to move that down here because there's no point spell checking stuff if you're going to cut it out. So let's start with cutting back first. So let's start with the headline. The average price per litre for unleaded petrol in the UK has decreased in the last year. One of the things about headlines is you can chop words out. So we can chop out the, for example, average price per litre for unleaded petrol has decreased in the last year. Now, in the UK, is something we can cut out because our audience is UK based, the publication is UK based, Birmingham East Side is the publication here. So our audience is going to assume that all stories are about the UK unless we tell them otherwise. And if it isn't in the UK, there needs to be a reason why we're reporting that story, why it might be of interest to our local audience. And major events would be of interest. So let's take out in the UK. We don't need that. We don't need per litre. That's extra detail. It's just the average price. And we can probably simplify unleaded petrol. We can probably take it down to petrol price and get to something like this. Now, headlines also often use present tense, whereas the articles will normally use past tense. So we can do that and take it has. So we've got average petrol price decreases in the last year. So that's much shorter. We've chopped out a number of words which we can do without in the headline. The headline doesn't have to give every piece of detail or every specific, because the article will fill in those extra pieces of context. It will tell us that we're talking about unleaded petrol. It will tell us what the specific period is. We can add extra information there as well. Even average, we can take that out. Decreases. And I'm going to go back to past tense actually. I'm going to make this an exception to the rule about present tense, because I think that makes a bit more sense with this because it's historical data. So petrol price dropped in the last year. Okay, so that's much more punchy now. Let's move on to the first sentence, the intro. And again, we can do some of the same sorts of things. Even if we were to say that this is in the UK, it shouldn't be the first piece of information. The kind of where of a story, the location where things happened, is almost never the most important piece of information in a story. So it should never really be at the top. It shouldn't be the first thing that you mention. Most often, where something happened or the geographical coverage of something will come in the second paragraph. So let's take that out and let's go with the. Oops. If I can, there we go. So the average price per litre for unleaded petrol has decreased by around 8% in the last year, according to recent data published on the gov.uk website. Now we've got something here, a specific date range. Well, that's covered in the second paragraph anyway, but also, again, this isn't massively important, and we can kind of understand broadly what's meant by the last year. So let's take that out. And let's just add a comma there. The average price per litre for unleaded petrol has decreased by around 8%. Well, if it's 8%, it's 8%. If we're rounding up, then that's fine. We can give a specific figure later, and actually we don't here. So everywhere else in this article, we're saying 8%. So let's just say 8%. Make it concrete. Okay, recent is another word we can chop out, because again, the audience will assume that that this is new information or new data. Actually, the word recent as well is a little bit woolly. Recent can be a week ago, so it might be old news. So new is a better word if we're gonna use a word there, use an adjective. And we're going to keep that in. I think we'll go with new data. Now it's said published on the gov.uk website. Again, that's probably unnecessarily specific in this first line. We can talk about who published this data later on, and indeed that is what happens in the second paragraph. So let's just take that out. And now we've got a much sharper, shorter first paragraph. The average price per litre for unleaded petrol has decreased by 8% in the last year, according to new data. So this is still mirroring what the headline is saying, but it's adding a few extra pieces of information, like it's the average, it's unleaded petrol, the amount it's dropped by, and here it's according to. So those things that we took out of the headline are kind of filled in with this first line. So it makes it a little bit more fleshed out, but still short. Now we can move on to the second paragraph, and the second paragraph is often where we're going to add more information about who and where and when, and those less important facts about this story. So we've got the who here, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, so that's good. We don't need the here, we can just go straight into petrol. Petrol and diesel prices data published by this department revealed that on the week commencing 5th December, Now, we're talking about last year here, and before we talk about this year. So I think it's probably better to reverse that and start in the present, and make this a little bit simpler. We've got quite a long line here. I think that's a new sentence there. So if you look at all of this, this is a very long sentence. It's a sentence that goes over 4 paragraphs. And if you see a paragraph that's that long, or a sentence that's long, it's a good sign that you probably need to split it up in some way. If there's more than one sentence, the obvious way to split it up would be to move one of those sentences down. But in this case, we've got a very long sentence here, so we can start to split that up. And let's have a think about this. What we really want to say is that if you think about how you were describing this to someone else, you would kind of say, well, it's this amount now, but a year ago it was this amount higher, sort of thing. So let's go with the average price for unleaded petrol in the UK. For the week commencing was that. Okay, so we start with okay, what it actually is revealing, because it's not revealing what the price was in December. So if I just go back to what it was like, this data isn't revealing anything about the 5th of December 2022, because that information was published a year ago. It's including that information in the new data, and the new data is basically the latest price, which is that the average price for unleaded petrol was 145.71 pence. Now, that's one fact. We can stop after we've given one fact, use a full stop, and start a new sentence. So a year earlier, on the week commencing 5th December 2022, it was 159.2 pence. So that structure's a little bit better. In fact, we can even put that in its own paragraph, and it makes it even punchier. So let's read this back. Petrol and diesel prices data published by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero revealed that the average price per litre for unleaded petrol in the UK for the week commencing 4th of December 2023 was 145. Okay. A year earlier, it was 159.2 pence. Now, this level of detail here, we could remove. We could just say a year earlier it was 159.20 pence. We don't necessarily need to give any more detail. Now, the bold elements here as well we can take out. We don't want too much bold. We just want kind of one item per paragraph to focus the eyes. So I'm just going to unbold those things. And I'm kind of thinking, can we chop back this for the week commencing 4th of December? Because that's quite a clunky collection of words. It's a bit jargony. So can we say that in plain language? Commencing, I think, let's go with beginning. That's certainly simpler. And I think I am going to take this whole date out. Now let's move on to the next line. Therefore, we don't want therefore in a news article, because that's the language of kind of academic writing or a formal argument. And all we need to do is state the fact. So we just want to say the average, you know, or a drop. In fact, it's not a drop because we're talking about history. So this is where that reversal of order is a little bit. We're going to have to rethink the phrasing here. But because we've already said it's decreased by 8%, we don't need to repeat that, and we don't need to kind of say how much it was, how much it's dropped by, because we've already kind of talked about that in percentage terms. So let's move on to the next paragraph. The data, now we've already said where it's from, so let's not repeat that. We can take that out. Provides a week-by-week breakdown of the average prices for unleaded petrol and diesel in the UK, as well as comparing week by week and year by week. Again, we don't really need to know what the data does because you're telling us the facts. So we can take that out as well. You've already told us what the comparison is year by year. And we don't need to know what range it covers. Now notice there's a typo here, but we don't have to correct it because we're deleting it. So that's another good reason of why we remove unnecessary information first before we do the spelling. So we've now got, just visually you should be able to see these are much cleaner, shorter sentences. We've removed kind of unnecessary extra detail or repetition. We've simplified language. Now we're up to the chart, and probably don't need a caption on the chart because we can see what it says. Hopefully the title should be self-explanatory, just like an image. Image captions normally just give us stuff that isn't in the image, like the names of the people involved or a little bit of context. We don't need that here. The chart is self-explanatory. It's got its own title. And we've got a final sentence here, which is fine. We could specify where they're going to be taken. So instead of just click here, we could say something like something like this, and we could change the link to that. Oops. So it'd be something like that, the petrol prices guide. Or guide, we're just going to have guide. Oops. We're not going to repeat petrol prices because we've already said that here. So we can just label it a little bit better rather than click here. So that's the article finished in terms of the cutting back. So we've done that. Spelling, I didn't spot any spelling mistakes or typos as we went through, but we can check again. In terms of style, though, there are things to look out for in terms of things like numbers, dates are good examples of things that would be affected by the house style. So 4th of December 2023, we need to check what the style is for writing dates in the BCU Journalism Style Guide. So we're not going to do that now, but that's one thing to kind of highlight. 8%, do we want to write that as a digit? So do we do it like that? Numbers below 10 should be written as words in the style guide. So, but we're talking about percentage, so there might be a different guideline for that. But I'm going to go with the style of writing as words, and that means that percent needs to be written as a word as well, because if we did this, it would look odd. So we need to write it as a word. Anything else? Hyphenation is something to check. So you might go off and check if week by week it's hyphenated. And that's it really in terms of spelling and style. Fact checking is what comes next. So what facts are in there? Have we checked them? So we'd have a look at this data and say, can we check it's decreased by 8%? That's one fact that we need to check. Is it published by this organisation? We need to check that. Is it this date range? Was it this price a year earlier? And we'd need to check the chart as well. So that's fact checking. And then finally, any missing information. Well, this is likely to be sources that aren't attributed. Now we've attributed the source of the data, so that's good, that's not missing. And also information that might be essential to this story. So, why has petrol decreased? We haven't got that information here, so maybe we need some background information. Why is it decreased? We can probably find some commentary, some kind of expert analysis already out there saying why it's decreased, but also quotes. We can have some quotes in here just to break it up a little bit, and probably a photo as well. A photo at the top, just something that isn't a chart. It might be, people filling up a car with petrol, something like that. That's something that we can add as well. So really we're talking about missing elements as well as missing information. So that's a walkthrough of editing a story. As I said, this is a good, well-written story, well-structured story. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done. Most of it is about simplifying and stripping back, removing information that the story will work without. And that's always the test. If you can remove a sentence and the story still makes sense, then it probably is the right decision to remove that sentence. And